Welcome to Creative Power, a podcast designed to help you claim the full spectrum of your creative potential. I'm Camilla Fellis-Arnold, and I'm passionate about discussing how we change the face of both the creative industries and how we interact with creativity itself, so that it nourishes our soul and helps us express ourselves with alignment, flow, and authenticity. Let's get started. Welcome to Creative Power. This week, we are about 6 weeks on from In Bulk, when I had the fabulous Emily Tuck come talk to us about the impact of In Bulk on creativity. So because we're 6 weeks on, we have another pagan festival. So the energy is going to shift. We've got Ostara coming up on the 20th of March. So I have invited Emily Tuck back to give us a bit of chat and explain what shifts are we looking at, what is going to happen, what can we expect in terms of creativity for the next 6 weeks. So in a 25 words or less kind of way, Emily, welcome back. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Okay, so for those who hadn't heard the In Bulk episode, this is the first time of hearing from me. My name is Emily Tuck, and I predominantly work with women and couples to understand the influence of Lilith, the goddess Lilith, and the influence that she can have over our creative projects, over our intimacy and our relationships, and over our business kind of legacy to the world. And yeah, I work with that predominantly online, and I also blend it with my kinesiology practice so that your conscious and subconscious are both being dealt with and aligned at the same time. So that's quite a unique sort of spin on things. And because of the creative element with Lilith, this is why I was invited to this podcast 6 weeks ago for Creative Power. So thank you so much for having me back again.
It's a pleasure.
And yes, today we're going to talk about Ostara. So we spoke about In Bulk 6 weeks ago. And if you want to go and find that episode, feel free so that you can see them as a set. But 6 weeks on, we're in a slightly different energy and feeling like spring has kind of sprung a little, or is beginning to think about springing at least. So what that does is what we can get out of that time of year is changed. Our energy levels are different. And therefore, I believe how you would approach the creative process is now in its next phase. So here I am again to talk about the changes that might be occurring now compared to 6 weeks ago.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because for people who didn't listen to the In Bulk episode, what Emily was saying we could expect from that time, which was from the 1st of February, was a kind of time of incubation. The ideas, they're just like under the surface, the roots are growing. We maybe consciously or not know what's coming up, but it was definitely still that wintering phase of creativity. There was definitely more of the ebb than the flow. So I'm really interested to see what you think, Emily. What is occurring now? Because although we're not at a major festival yet, Ostara is the Spring Equinox. So this is one of the minor festivals in the pagan wheel of the year. But I don't know about you, I can definitely feel the shift. Things are changing. So tell us about that.
So for me, I think they are definitely changing. I can feel people are talking about the idea that winter's now finished and spring is occurring. Equally, I can see where we're not quite in full stride yet. And I think part of the reason that happens, so as a festival, what happens is it's the fertility festival. It sits around about Easter, because actually Easter is always the first full moon after the Spring Equinox, so after Ostara. So this year, we're just having a full moon in the next week, and therefore it's another 4 weeks before we hit Easter. But sometimes when Easter is what they call early, it's because the full moon is just after Ostara. So you get Easter and Lent happen earlier because it was built so that it was next door. And the reason it was next door is so that we would be distracted by the Christian festivals and therefore ignore the pagan ones.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that at all.
Always the
Wow.
first full moon after Ostara. So because we have a full moon this week, we've got to wait another 28 days to get around to Easter. But sometimes they're next door. So this is about the fertility festival, I suppose, and about what are we bringing into the world. So with that comes, what seeds are we planting now that will yield when we get to harvest in kind of August? So the harvest festival, when we get round to that one, is the 1st of August. But what actions are we taking now? What changes are we making now? What things are we doing now that are going to harvest come August? So that's the first way to look at it. The other way to think about it, if it's a fertility, it is what are we making fertile? What are we starting to bring into the world? So where you've been incubating with Inbulk, you didn't know what you were bringing to life. You were still deep under the ground, and it was kind of hadn't got a shape yet, but it was in the corner of your eye. Now It's slightly less in the corner of your eye, but you might only be going, who do I need to speak to about that? What class do I need to join in order to learn that language or take up that exercise? So I, for example, in the last 6 weeks, have gone from, there's no point doing a New Year's resolution because I'm just not ready yet, which was very Inbulky, to going, actually, I'm thinking about taking up an exercise routine. Mm-hmm. And I'll be clear, so that we're managing expectations of our listeners, thinking about is as far as I've got. Whereas I wasn't even allowing myself to think about it come Christmas and January because there would have been no point. I didn't have enough forward momentum.
Yeah.
So I've purchased the things for my yoga class that I haven't found yet and my intentions that I haven't set up. But the fact that I've purchased it is a move forward. It's a step in the right direction. So creatively, you might be like, I fancy buying those art supplies. I fancy finding out if there's a workshop about writing. But I'm not ready to sit and write my book yet. I just want to see if there's anyone out there who might have a shape I can use or someone I can get support from. Because the other thing with this time of year is it's the 5 elements of, in Chinese 5 elements, it's wood. And wood is about who are you being in the world and what's your new projects and what are you birthing. So again, falling into line with Ostara. But also, when you start something, if you aren't that person yet or you're making that change, all the reasons why you can't do it suddenly come to the surface. So if I, for example, got my mat out with aplomb, a bit like we do when we got my yoga mat out in the way that we do on the 1st of January, right, it's going to be, and it will last about 2.5 minutes before we go.
Yeah, we kind of throw ourselves into it with gusto, and then suddenly all the 50 reasons why this is not going to sit right with us subconsciously, then throw up.
Yeah, because if I know myself to be someone who doesn't exercise, if I suddenly start getting my yoga mat out or going to the gym, it lasts about 3 weeks before I go. Yeah. That's not who I am. But you see, and similarly, if you bought things for creative projects, or you've bought a nice box of stuff you can collage with, or you've bought materials that you're going to make into something, and you're going to dress make, and you go, I just bought a load of fabric and it's sitting in the corner.
Yeah.
But I didn't make the dress. So this is what I find is the beautiful thing about this phase, is this is your opportunity. Instead of seeing it as, I didn't make it, I didn't do it, another failed attempt to write my book, another dress I didn't make, another painting I didn't. Take a second and go, right, I'm going to use this time as the opposition comes up, as the 27 reasons why I can't be a painter, an artist, a book writer, and whatever it is that is your creative flair. 27 reasons why I can't get on my yoga mat because apparently I'm too this, too that, too the other. Take notes. Acknowledge it. Journal it. Because in knowing it, you can then do something about this. And in this 6 weeks, you can do something to change your subconscious self-image around it. So instead of fighting yourself with, why can't I do this? I'm a failure, or variations on that, imposter syndrome. Yes. Who am I to write that book? Who am I to do this? Okay. But I can use this time to transform that a bit So that when we hit Beltane, which is the 1st of May, which is the next time I'll be back if people still want me.
Yeah, we're having you back.
By then, you have enough change in your subconscious idea that when the yoga mat comes out or the canvas goes up or you sit to write, it flows better because the opposition, subconscious opposition to who you're attempting to be, has moved.
Mm. That's a really good point. I think it's really hard actually because and people will know what I mean by this, where you get this idea of, oh, I'm going to try this new project, I'm going to try a new craft or whatever it is. And you start, as Emily's been saying, you start buying the things and it does bring up all those feelings of imposter syndrome. Who am I to do this? What if I'm going to be rubbish? And I think as creators, we often forget that we can use those clues and work on them. As you said, take notes. But I think this is where a lot of people will struggle. So I'm going to hand it over to you and say, what do we do about that? When we've taken these notes, how do we then use this time to work on changing who we be in the world so that actually come Beltane, we can get into action?
So I think the way of looking at it is, first of all, don't beat yourself up, because first thing to acknowledge is that when your brain has a gap between who you know yourself to be. So let's use, you're going to be a writer. If you think of yourself as someone who isn't a writer, maybe once upon a time somebody said you're going to be rubbish at that. Maybe it's as simple as it's just not something you've cultivated. Either way, you don't think of yourself as a writer. So that subconscious self-image must be maintained at all costs, because otherwise we go crazy. That's the short version of that story. However, when we take up an activity or a habit or a new thing that is not in line with that behavior, so for example, I'm not a writer and now I'm sitting down to write, I don't see myself as an artist, but now I'm standing at a canvas with paints. There's a gap. That gap can be maintained by your subconscious for about 4 or 5 weeks, maybe 6 at a push. And then you'll just stop doing it. You don't sit down to do it. The lessons tail off, whatever.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to go back to your original subconscious self-image. But here's the thing. If you take this opportunity to change the beliefs, the gap closes, but it closes in the opposite direction. So now you're someone who knows yourself to be a writer, even if that's just an emerging concept or an emerging writer. And now sitting down to the table to do the writing or standing at the canvas is something that is natural and in line. So I would turn up to my yoga classes with ease rather than totally find something else to do on a Wednesday, whatever it looks like. So we're closing the gap, but we're closing it in the opposite direction so that you're in line with the activity and therefore you can take it forward. So I think the first thing I would do is, does introducing my creative practice make me feel like I've got power? Yeah, it does. So I'm making a powerful choice. Now, what can I do to maintain that? So where I work with my clients, we look at what strategies can we use? What tools can we use? So I'm going to list a couple just so that you've got an idea of what I'm talking about. Like, one of my kinesiology tools is called emotional stress release. And I think what we'll do for this episode actually is I'm going to get you to put it in the show notes as a gift to your listeners.
We can do that.
Emotional stress release technique, because all it is placing your hand on the top of your forehead and just lightly putting your fingers there. And what it does is you are encouraging the blood flow away from the parts of your brain that are all emotional, or I can't do this, or I'm scared, or I'm afraid, and into, actually, maybe if I approach it this way, I could. It's called emotional stress release, and we'll put a little handout in the show notes.
Yes, I will make sure that's there.
So you guys can access the technique. But what it does is, if you then sat and imagined yourself as someone who can't write, I don't know myself as a writer, oh my God. So you're taking your current self-image and you are releasing the stress that it creates around it. What that then does is you can now be in free flow around that. So I don't need to see myself as not a writer. That's not stressful now. I'm okay about that. Equally, if we did the positive version, I'm seeing myself as a writer and I can do this and, oh my God, I don't like to be a writer, immediately surfaces. So now, imagine yourself as the writer and apply this technique. Suddenly, the stress around the success now falls away. So now the imposter syndrome can't hit because I'm not stressed by its success. I'm not stressed by its failure. And you could even do a current, like just imagining trying to find an hour in a day to sit and write. You could do it around that. But by taking the stress out of all of the pieces, your subconscious self-image can close around your activity.
That's fantastic.
And my programs have multiple techniques that do it in different ways and dig a bit deeper and take bigger steps and whatever. But that's a real beginner's technique. Something practical you can do around allowing that change to occur in your subconscious.
But even though it is a beginner's technique, as you say, actually, I've used it myself multiple times and I find it so incredibly powerful because, I'm one of those people who gets the whirring mind and it just races and races and, it's very stressful. And it just, you have to sit there for a few minutes, 10 minutes, maybe 15. And what I found, just so my listeners do understand, it does bring up all the thoughts. When you first start, you'll be thinking, maybe it is, I'm not a writer. For me, I would probably go away and use it on whether I can do yoga or not, because like Emily, I've got some issues around that. And every 4 to 5, maybe 6 weeks, I'll get into the habit. And then my tendonitis injury from when I was at school plays up to maintain nope, you don't do yoga. You're not an exercise person. You're not healthy, blah, blah, blah. But what happens in other situations when I've used it is I'll think about, didn't think of myself as a writer, hold these points on my forehead. And it brings up all the different reasons. And you just listen, you just follow that train of thought, just let it go wherever it's going. It will bring all of those things up. And then as you just let it occur, it just starts to quiet. It starts to slow down. And then it does become less stressful. And if you try again later, you can't always find those thoughts again. It's just, ESR is so powerful. I love it.
And that's the difference between worrying about something or letting it churn. And when you have your hands on these points, you're defusing the stress on the situation. So if you have your hands off your points, you're just worrying. Mm-hmm. But if you're going to be worrying, you might as well have your hands on your points and be diffusing it.
Very true.
What happens is inside your head, you run the ideas, you run the thoughts, you just let them come up and come through. But eventually your brain can't hold on to the concept. Sometimes in that process, your brain will find a solution. Like, I didn't think about doing it on a Monday night instead of a Wednesday morning. Mm-hmm. It could be that you just go, it just sort of disappeared and it doesn't feel such a big deal now. Whatever happens, it's just doing whatever it needs to do to diffuse the stress. But the beautiful thing about it is if you think about when you're stressed out, a lot of people do this intuitively. They go, oh my God. They put their hands on their forehead. Oh my God, it's a nightmare. Yes. But what happens when we do that intuitively is we're instinctively going to the space that would help this progress. But what we do, of course, if we slam our hands on our forehead, then we put pressure on it. Mm-hmm. And the pressure doesn't diffuse the stress. That's why it's finger-like touch. So the difference of the application of so instinctively we do it, and yet because we put too much pressure through, we don't get the result. But actually our bodies know the answers. So it has kind of done that. So that's something that we use. And then when I'm working with people, they go, okay, now I've realized there's a whole pattern here around a limiting belief. I would use different tools in different orders for the person, right? But ultimately you're starting to step into, by reducing the stress out of it and stepping into what does it look like. And I remember somebody explaining it to me years ago and saying the best way to use this technique, so when we're talking about you as the creative person, imagine your worst case scenario, imagine your best case scenario, and imagine your sort of middle of the road scenario. So you've decided you're a writer. So now you write prolifically and nobody buys a damn thing. Then you write prolifically, and now you're like J.K. Rowling, and you don't know which way to go, right? And then you sort of, probably what will happen is you write, and the right people will find the book, and maybe it will have an incredible success. But you've allowed for the reasonable option, the catastrophic version, and the massively successful version. So now you're not undercutting yourself either by its success or by its failure or by its middle. And he described it once that if he was imagining his GCSE results or his A levels or his final degree, what would happen is either he'd walk into the exam hall and he wouldn't have studied the right syllabus and it's the wrong questions and his whole life fell apart and now he'd be destitute living on the street. And then the next version was he did all right and he got into uni. And then the next version is that somebody arrives and goes, oh my God, we've never seen results like it. We want you to join MI6. You're like, you've got a superpower. And he's like, oh my God, what will that do? I'll have to cut off my family, but also I'll be rich and they'll all want my money. And then so by doing all three versions.
It's actually quite helpful in a way to work through those best, worst case and just any old case scenario. I mean, you could even do that going back a couple of episodes. If you want to listen, I did one on journaling. So you could actually journal through what is the best case scenario? What is the worst case? What is that, this is kind of the average most likely to happen, and just see what comes up, see how you feel, like I said, journal through the feelings. And it can be really surprising what you can actually let go of, even with these really simple techniques.
And if you blend it with the journaling, it could be that you journal beforehand and then you hold your points about what you journaled. It could be that in holding your points about the stressful thing, suddenly there's a freedom and now you can journal.
Oh, I like that. It
can work in both directions because also once we've reduced the stress, now you're writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when you're journaling, what's to stop you being Anne Lister? What's to stop you being Anne Frank?
I think actually that's a really good point. Yeah, it's a really good point. Actually, people definitely, I know I have in the past, separate the idea of journaling from writing. We see writing as something very formal that we sit down to do, and it's quite serious and it's got the intention of being published. But if you look at someone like Anne Frank, for example, she's a writer. We look at that book and we read it and it's amazing. But she was just writing in her diary every day. So actually you can even reframe the idea. Say you do write in a diary or you do journaling occasionally. If you're struggling with the idea of am I a writer, maybe you write blog posts, social media posts. They're all writing. It's just about how we look at it.
And that's where Ostara is an excellent opportunity, because you might find that the ways in which you write change. Oh, I didn't write my magnum opus. No, but you know what you did do? Is you wrote something that was a blog. But one day that will become part of your process. So again, you're planting seeds that will harvest. What's the writing seeds that you're planting now that become something that you harvest later? And one of my favourite writers is Anais Nin. And Anais Nin did both. She has books that she wrote, like things like Delta of Venus or Henry and June. So they are books that she wrote. But equally, she has her diaries.
Yes.
So within the market, there's both.
It's allowing that. I think at this time of year, it's allowing the flexibility to see what the possibilities are. That's a feeling. That's what I'm hearing from you about Ostara. It's just seeing what seeds are starting to sprout. And you can it's almost like panning for gold, sifting through what have we got. I mean, me and you were talking earlier about the idea that you've been incubating all of these ideas and things are going to start surfacing, and trying to work out what we're taking forward, what ideas are having a reshape, what things we're letting go of. There's a lot of momentum that's starting to build right now, and it's how do we work out what to do with that?
And some of these ideas won't have mileage. Some of these ideas we've been incubating, they won't have mileage, and they'll just, but it's the grace to allow them to die. Equally, they may have mileage, but they won't harvest yet. So we talked about the idea that sometimes the return on a project is a couple of weeks. So, for example, if you are planting seeds, and what that looks like is a load of activity around an art exhibition that you then put on in 3 months' time. It's had a short return time. But equally, you could be doing something that doesn't look like it's going anywhere, but actually 12 months from now, there's a whole thing around it. So it's allowing the seeds to have different germination times. The seeds that we plant now can have different germination times, different harvest times. But they're not dying.
When I used to work as a freelance designer, it was about any time from January to about now, we would be working on things like greeting cards for Christmas, calendars, but not for this year. We were actually designing these for 18 months time release. So not this Christmas, but the next one. So it's allowing all of these ideas to come up. And yes, I know as a creative person, it's super exciting when they do, and you want to do all the things and oh my goodness, I just want to get started. But equally, it's about, and this is something I'm learning for myself, it's about looking at them and seeing how long is the return window on this? Is it something that's really long term? Is it something short term? Is it something medium? Who knows? But these ideas are all going to start surfacing now, and then we can work out how we're prioritizing, because the real action will be starting come Beltane.
And I think that's a really important thing to realise when you're looking at these projects, is because you're not actively on them now all the time, doesn't mean they died. Because sometimes that can be a frustration in emerging creatives is, well, I haven't done my, cross stitch today, therefore I must be losing it. Well, no, what happens if it's only meant to be in that phase?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it doesn't mean it's died. It means you alternate your creative outlets because they have different bits in different times and spaces. And the other thing that then comes from that is I'm planting a seed now, or I'm choosing a seed now. From in bulk, I'm coming around. This one's got life right now. And I'm going to do a certain amount with it. And then I don't know what to do with it next. So I'm going to move on to the next thing. But that hasn't died. It's now waiting for something else to come and meet it later on in the year that maybe you're doing next. So what you're doing is, by allowing the rotation and the different germination periods on different projects, you're not sitting there going, I feel like I've failed in 27 ways. You're going, that's not ready yet. That's still percolating. This I've done, but I'm waiting for something. And sometimes, I don't know about you, 9 times out of 10, I don't always know what I'm waiting for.
Well, yes, exactly.
I just know that it doesn't feel right, doesn't taste right, whatever. In the corner of I call it in the corner of my eye. In the corner of my eye, just out of my periphery, I can't see what it is I'm waiting for. And then I'll have a conversation with somebody, or I'll do something, or I'll listen to a podcast, or I'll be reading a book, and I'll say, that's what I was waiting on.
Yeah.
So I'll come to somebody and I'll say, that project that we look like we parked for like 8 months ago,
it's come back around. Yeah. And we're ready to work on it.
Can we talk about that now again? Because I think if we put this in fact, I can give you an excellent example of that. You and I worked last year on a project. And we lived and breathed it and changed our subconscious self-image, as I've been describing and sharing with you in this episode. We did that in February of last year, and it went right the way through.
Mm-hmm.
And what was fascinating about it was, when we got to Beltane, which was the 1st of May, you and I both said, oh my God, I'm exhausted. And it wasn't that we were bored of our project, so we didn't like what we were doing, but we couldn't run on the energy of that time of year into the next season. We had to stop, take a breath, let ourselves regroup, and then do it.
We went to bed for the entire weekend.
I'll talk to you on Monday, I'm out. And we came back on Monday with fresh eyes.
Yeah.
But also the energy of that season. So if in listening to this episode you're like, yeah, I was feeling a bit fatigued last week, that's okay, because actually you were letting go of the last of the in-bulk energy. But if you looked at it with the eyes of the Ostara planting seeds energy, would that breathe new life into it? Maybe it would. But the other thing that we did with that was we built a program. We built the coaching program, and that was beautiful. But I remember saying to you way back then, I said, there's this piece, this extra tool that we haven't played with yet.
Yes, I remember.
And I almost, from your point of view, you said to me, I didn't even know you did that. I didn't even know that was in your toolkit. And I said, I don't know why. And I haven't thought about this particular tool, for various reasons, for a few years. But I've got a funny feeling this sits somewhere in it. And what we have found over the last 3 or 4 months is not only does it live maybe in there somewhere, it actually is the first step. So now we realise we'd started on step 2, but we didn't know what step 1 was because we were waiting for it to show up. So now we've got a whole new breath of life into the project, but we had to wait 12 months for that final piece to show up. Now, some people out there who are, emerging or trying to step into their creative power might have gone down the road of, well, forget it. I'm obviously rubbish at this, I can't do it. Or I feel like it's not a full project, or I feel like it's not the full potency. You know what? That seed was planted however long ago, thousands of lifetimes. But this particular tool that we've put in, just to give it some proper germination context, I came across that tool in 2017. And then it sat in my wardrobe, and I used it in a specific context, but it sat in a box waiting to be used. And I've gone back to the person who's made the tool and said, look, I want to breathe new life into your tool. But in turn, it has breathed new life into our project.
Yeah, it really has.
If I decided that was like the equivalent of creative abortion or creative termination or creative, I'm not going to see what happens to that, I would never have had a fresh look at it. So that had a really long return time.
Yeah, I think that's really important because when I look at what I do and how I coach people now, I'm bringing together 10 years worth of various and very wide-ranging experiences. And there's been times where I've sat there thinking I have a qualification or I have a specific piece of knowledge that I didn't quite know what to do with it. And it's not that I'm discarding them. I just kind of leave them sitting in the side and just think, oh, well, one day it will come back around. I don't know when, I don't know where, I don't know how or why, but it does. I mean, I've got projects that I'm in the process of, they will be out soon, like my creative archetypes. I fell in love with archetypes years and years and years ago. And then Emily, you introduced me to them again in another outfit 2 years ago. And I was like, oh, there's something with this. I love it. I want to do something with it. It's going to be a thing, but I didn't know what. And I remember having conversations with you so many times like, oh, we can't discard this. We don't know what to do with it or how to use it, but it's going to be a thing. So when it finally came back round and I literally woke up with, oh my goodness, I see it now, just kind of dropped into my head as this perfectly finely formed thing. Suddenly it's like, oh, it was worth just hanging on to that. You know how I have loads and loads of craft materials, scraps of paper, buttons, all kinds of things in my home office that I'm just keeping because you know what, one day they might be useful. And there's always this part where I think people start to feel a bit bad. They berate themselves a little bit because it's like, oh, well, why am I keeping all these things? I haven't looked in my box of ribbons for 50 million years. Surely I don't need them anymore. But actually, I think what we're trying to say is it's okay to just let them sit there if it feels like maybe they do have a point, but you don't know when or where or why or how. Just let it be there. I think there's something to be said for knowing when something is really dead and it's time to let it go, and actually sitting there and being able to say, this idea isn't finished. I don't know where it's going, but it's not finished. So I'm going to just leave it in the corner.
And I think that's a really interesting point about knowing what is dead, because this wasn't a response to Ostara. This was a response. This happened in the last week for me. I had shifted enough of my subconscious self-image with working. In my case, I work with a hypnotherapist. Anyway, something shifted enough and I went, oh, I think it's time I sorted out my workspace. Well, a week later, I was still clearing out old paperwork. Mm-hmm. And there were things you have to keep, like your tax returns, your client files and things like this for various reasons. But I found a different way to file them and get them out of my space. For example, my old tax returns no longer live actually in the office. They're archived in the garage. But now they're not in my workspace. So there's room and, room for things to breathe. So this is where your idea of the spring cleaning comes from.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, it's very good to go, that's dead. Let it die.
Yeah.
It'll come up with something else later or it won't. But, and I was looking at old notes that I had made around plans for my business. And I read them and I thought, this isn't me anymore. This is not me at all. It's not even a seed of something I can use eventually. This is just dead.
Mm-hmm.
So entire folders, contents of entire folders went in the bin.
Wow.
Equally, I found something that was the note that I made to myself 5 years before, saying, maybe even longer than that, 2014, so what's that, 5, 6 years? And I'd said, go and investigate this qualification. And I put it in a Post-it, put it in a plastic wallet, and I'd forgotten what was even in the folder. But you know what? I'm currently doing that qualification. 6 years later, 5 years later, whatever it is, I'm currently doing that qualification. So that seed didn't die, it just took a while to germinate.
Yeah.
But I can now throw away the note because it's no longer a forward planning from 5 years ago, it's an occurring now. But it's about allowing that spring clean and then go, right, that's dead. And then I found other notes and I went, oh, that note is the pre-version of the thing that belongs with over here. For example, you and I have talked about transactional analysis as a concept. We've talked about it in the context of my favourite book. We've bored ourselves to death with this concept. I found the original notes I was given by an employer in 2014 when they used it as an HR strategy for conflict resolution.
Oh, wow.
So we may or may not use those. But you know what? I put them in the pile because when we come to look at that project in another outfit, there they live.
The seeds were planted long ago, yeah.
So I was able to pull out the bits that were relevant to the seeds I needed and know what was dead. So it's about what seeds are we planting, what do we need as part of that. And actually, these ones aren't seeds that have any life anymore. Let them go.
It's okay to let them go.
And this is where in-bulk is often seen as the in-bulk, the previous phase we've just been in, is often seen as the death.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, but equally it's life, death, life. So what comes back and brings life back in? So the incubating pieces that then have life and forward momentum, these are the ones we take forward in Ostara. And as we take them forward, it goes, oh, hang on, you can't take that forward while you still think of yourself like this. Okay, what can we do about that? But we continue to take them forward. Give it another 6 weeks when we hit Beltane, it will have proper forward momentum. Because you're in the summer, spring has definitely sprung, you've taken up those new habits. So 6 weeks on, but there are things that were there in the choosing and in the selecting and in the incubating that didn't make the cut. And maybe they died. Maybe they've gone into a longer germination period. So you're not beating yourself up when some of these ideas come forward and some don't. Because you never quite know. And I find that quite exciting.
It is. It's the fun of it, isn't it? I think that's one of the things that I love about really being aware of the pagan wheel and how it affects creativity, because it's really embracing that ebb and flow, and it's not flying blind entirely, but it has got that kind of adventurous, I don't know where I'm going next to it sometimes. And that's really fun. So actually embrace this shift in gear and have fun with it, because you know what, creativity, I know we pour our heart and souls into it. It can get serious business when you are putting so much of you into what you do. But I think what I'm feeling right now is there's a lightness of touch to Ostara. So allow yourself to embrace that.
And it has a lightness that in-bulk didn't, because in-bulk was still a little bit in the descent, a little bit in the winter. So there is a lightness now. So just see where it takes you. And I think the big take homes are, this is an opportunity to look at what's standing in the way of who you're choosing to be. I think another big take home is allowing what's dead to die, but also allowing things to have a longer incubation so they don't need to be dead. Yes. You can cut off. There's a part of you that's been judging yourself because you haven't created yet, and you haven't created. You know what? If I allow it to go with the flow, a lot more of these ideas will harvest. than I previously thought. And it's a real opportunity just to breathe new life in it. What needs a breath of fresh air?
Exciting. It really is.
And maybe what are the new seeds that have never seen the light of day yet, and they're proper new.
Mm-hmm.
They're not new because I did them 5 years ago and they got a new face. They're new. What's the inspiration that's popping in that needs a life, needs a breath of fresh air? You know, I don't know if we talked about it in Inbolt, but you and I talk about that idea that creative ideas have their own energy, and there are like physical entities in the universe. Well, what new creative ideas are suddenly about to land that you then you can pop into the list?
Oh, it's exciting. Wow. So what I'm going to do at the end of when I upload the episode is I will make sure that we put the ESR, emotional stress release handout, in the show notes. So if you do want to start to work on who you be in the world and get rid of some of that stress and imposter syndrome around whatever's coming up for you, then you can find that. If you would like to ask us any questions, and also Emily's going to be coming back at Beltane, so you can ask some questions in advance, you can now send me a voice message on SpeakPipe. I'll leave a link for that in the show notes as well. Emily, if anyone wants to work with you and find out a bit more about what you do, where can they find you?
So I predominantly hang out on LinkedIn, so feel free to find me there.
Likewise.
I'm the woman with the top hat when you're looking at the photograph, all the Emily Tucks on LinkedIn. I'm the one with the top hat.
Nice.
You can also find me on my website, which is emilytuck.com. Just come have a look at my offerings. You might want to book a discovery call, not specifically because you want one of the programs that's there, but you're like, I feel like this is something I want to talk about. Can we find a way to work together? Please feel free, because I'd rather have the conversation and we can find a way to make something fit than, oh, this is the box it lives in. Because as I've just proven for the last however long we've been talking, I have plenty of creative ideas. What happens if you become a beta tester for something that isn't on the website yet? So feel free to get in touch there too.
Fabulous.
So yeah, find me there.
I will put all those links in the show notes.
And of course, feel free to get in touch via Camilla and say, I heard her on your podcast. Who is she? Where can I find her? And we can also be put in touch via Camilla as well.
I will make sure that you are all put in touch if you want to work with Emily. And like I said, she will be back again for Beltane, if not before, which is the 1st of May. So thank you so much, Emily, for being here again. It's always a pleasure. And we will see you in about 6 weeks' time.
See you in about 6 weeks. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Creative Power today. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and consider leaving a review. To find out more ways you can connect or work with me, please visit www.camillafellisarnold.com/creative power.